Crimson Crossover Network. This is The Tide Machine with Charles Branch and Michael Southern. Welcome, everybody, to the first episode of The Tide Machine. We're here. We've got it kicked off, and we're ready to get going. My name's Charles Branch, joined with Michael Southern. Michael, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing quite well, Charles. Looking forward to this. I think this is going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be pretty unique to add a little historical perspective and a lot of memories from a lot of different generations of Alabama football fans.
Absolutely. I was talking about it before we started recording. Something that I've thought about for probably a year. There's no doubt Alabama football is the most prestigious, historic program in all of college football, and been around for 125 plus years. Won a lot of football games. Obviously, the most national championships. Don't have to. We might claim a few that we shouldn't, but not as many as the other school on the other side of the state. But just thought this might be a fun opportunity to get back in the time machine and look at previous games that we have against our future opponents. Like you said, a lot of really good Alabama football podcasts out there. We're obviously partial to the M3 podcast over at Crimson Crossover that just started with Matthew Travis, Matt Herford, and Josh McMillan. So if you haven't given them a listen, finish listening to us first. Like us, subscribe us, all that, and then go give them a listen and do the same thing. But very excited to get this started with you. Michael, for our listeners who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Alabama fan for a long time. Grew up in West Alabama, north of Tuscaloosa, about 35 miles in Fayette County. Um, Pretty much ordained the fact that I was going to go to Alabama, which I did, and graduated in 92. So my historical perspective of Alabama, all Alabama athletics, not just football, basketball, everything, is going to start probably in the late 70s at the end of the Bryant era. And then I was firsthand witness for every coaching transition and turmoil and good times, bad times since then. So seen it all. So Bryant to Perkins to Curry to Stallings to Dubose to Shula to Price, or no, sorry, Dubose to Franchione, then to Price, Shula, and then of course Nick Saban. So a lot of coaching changes. I always joke, not joke, but the current young generation, when they had to transition away from Nick Saban, that's their first jolt. Well, for people my age, which are Generation X or baby boomers, we've already seen it. We went through the Bryant transitionary period. So brought back some, I don't know, brought back memories, brought back a little bit of scared times, but we've been through it. We've seen Alabama survive and move on, and it will happen again this time too as well.
Yeah, I really hope that we don't have a revolving door at the Malvern
No,
Athletic Facility. I don't
no.
think we will have one with Coach DeBoer. The only way that happens, in my opinion, is if he heads to the NFL. But very excited. It may not have been what Alabama fans wanted in his first year, but I think everything's been put in place, and very excited about the upcoming season that we have with year two under Coach DeBoer. For those who don't know me, I'm Charles Branch, also an Alabama graduate. My first year at Alabama was Nick Saban's first year. So I did get a national championship under my belt. I am old enough that I was my some of my first Alabama memories as far as games and being there was in 1996. So Coach Stallings last year. So everybody that you just rattled off, Stallings to Dubose to Franchione to Price for his spring game and Shula and all that. I was right there, and that was really tough as a young child. So uh, very very happy that we got the Saban years, and looking forward to many many more good years, hopefully on the horizon for Alabama football.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. Look, Alabama wandered in the wilderness for a while there after the Stallings era, and Alabama took their lumps, paid their penance. Then the Renaissance happened, and again, I agree with you. I think DeBoer. I like what I see. Obviously, people weren't extremely happy about last year, the way it ended with some of the losses. But again, I've seen that happen with a first year coach. You've got to give him time to get his culture, get his players, get everything settled. After that happens, then you can grade him on how he progresses after starting in year two, year three.
Well, we just quickly, when we think about those former Alabama coaches between Stallings to Saban, what gives me a lot of confidence on any coach that's going to be at Alabama, all except Mike Price. Every one of them had a 10-win season at Alabama at some point in their tenure, and was competing for national championships. Franchione, not so much because we were having to deal with probation, but that second year was obviously on the rise and was building a lot of good things. So, we know you can win at Alabama. People care about Alabama football. There's a lot of people that want to go play at Alabama. So you're always going to have a lot of tools at your disposal to be very, very successful. So as we start, kind of kicking off and getting into Florida State a little bit, uh, we've been used to big time matchups against non-conference opponents, but for the past decade or so, those have really been on neutral sites. And it's the first time that we're starting on the road since 2020 in COVID against Missouri, but the first time against a non-conference opponent since UCLA in 2000, which was not the best experience for for Alabama fans. We had a lot of high hopes coming into that year. Started off the year as number three in the country and only finished with 3 wins that season. It was very tough to, talking about those difficult times. You remember anything about that season or just how it kind of played out and some of the challenges with that and the frustration?
Well, I think the biggest thing that everyone realized is the year before the 1999 team, that was Sean Alexander and Chris Samuel's team. That was not Mike Dubos's team because the wheels came off the very next year. They had enough foundational talent to do something because you actually saw the results the following year and the year after with what Franchione was starting to build with it, with the remnants of that talent. But you surely missed the leadership of Sean Alexander and Chris Samuels in 2000. And yeah, that the wheels fell off. The Dubose tenure came to a crashing halt, and that was just a very embarrassing time for everybody in 2000.
I still will never forget. I was fortunate enough to go out to Pasadena for that game. UCLA got the ball first. We held them to a 3-and-out. They punt. Freddie Millens catches it, jitterbugs down the sidelines for our first score. We're up 7-0. We're thinking national championship, and of course, we end up losing the game 35-24. And as I was telling you, we played Virginia Tech in 2013 to open the year in Atlanta. And I remember Christian Jones. We held Virginia Tech to a 3-and-out. Christian Jones takes the punt all the way back. I turned to my dad and I said, I really hope this season doesn't turn out the same way that season did in 2000. And to bring it back to our opponent for this week and what we're going to talk about, Florida State, if not for one of the craziest endings in college football, probably would have seen Florida State in the national championship that year.
Yeah, I think that would have been a matchup most people would have liked to have seen. You had Alabama trying to go for an unprecedented three-peat, and then you had Florida State with of course, the eventual Heisman winner in Jameis Winston, who was from Alabama. So that would have made a lot of good storylines. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. And I think what we talked about, the strange thing about Florida State is you have Florida State, which itself went on a historic run in the late 80s and 90s with Bobby Bowden. But Alabama and Florida State's paths just don't cross very often. I mean, it's a rare occurrence that these two programs face each other. They just seem to run in like different silos. They're in like parallel universes, and it's going to take an incursion for them to actually play each other. So that's kind of how I look at this game this year. Again, even during the Saban run, they played twice. They played, the one game in Jacksonville. That was Saban's first year. I know a lot of people gave Kareem Jackson a hard time. He got burned on a couple of deep passes, but he was a true freshman. And then they played again in 2017, but that's really it. And before that, again, Alabama's only played the Seminoles 5 times in over 125 years of football history. So that's pretty incredible that two storied programs just have not played each other that often.
No. Well, I want to go to our most recent victory, in my opinion, against Florida State, and that would have had to have been the 2024 college football playoff selection, where we got the 4 seed and undefeated
Oh,
Florida State, who was on their third string quarterback, uh, got the 5 seed, which kept them out of the college football playoff. We would go on to play Michigan, and they would go on to lose 63-3 to Georgia in the Orange Bowl, who we had just beat in the SEC championship. What do you remember that December going into Selection Sunday? I think a lot of Alabama fans felt good about their chances, but also might have been resigned to the fact that, look, we did lose a game. Florida State's undefeated. We had just gotten pushed out by TCU the previous year, where they had lost a game. We had lost two really good two close games that lost a field goal to Tennessee and LSU, or no, excuse me, not a field goal to LSU. It was the 2-point conversion at LSU. But what do you remember going into Selection Sunday in December 2023?
So when it came to that weekend tension on that Sunday, my in my heart, I felt Alabama deserved to be in there, and they were one of the top four teams. But look, Alabama also, I'm going to tie this into basketball. We have a longstanding history of not getting well, I don't know, treated fairly by committees. How about that? In our past on certain things. So there was always a reservation and trepidation before that announcement. But I'll tell you though, when they unveiled Texas at 3, then I said Alabama's in because we knew it was going to happen. Texas had to be above us because they beat us head to head. But once they unveiled Texas at 3, I was like, okay, I think Alabama's in good shape.
Yeah, and I know Florida State fans would blame their performance against Georgia because of that result and that they had a lot of players opt out. And of course, as I mentioned, on their third string quarterback, but they didn't play really anybody that entire year. They beat a really bad Clemson team. They beat Duke, who was ranked at the time, but then the next team that they played was Louisville in the ACC championship game that was ranked. They beat them 16-6 in what was a really, really ugly game. So, would have liked the end of that year to have been better for us, would have liked to have closed out Michigan, but ultimately I do think the college football playoff selection committee made the right decision. And I think that's actually a unique year where everybody talks about there's no reason to expand the playoff. We just need four teams. We don't need to go to 12 or 16. Can you imagine if we had an 8-team playoff in 2023, 2024? Because that would have brought in Florida State, Georgia, Oregon had not moved into the Big Ten at that point. It was between them and Washington out in the Pac-12. And I think either Penn State or Ohio State would have been that eighth team. That would have been a fun college football 8-team playoff to have watched 2 years ago if we had gotten to that point.
It's always funny the way that works out because the usually what happens is this: you'll have the year when you say, "Well, this is the year that we should have an expanded playoff," and then the year when you have the expanded playoff, you're like, "Man, half these teams are terrible. We didn't need an expanded playoff." So it always goes back and forth. So it's never ever going to work out perfectly, but that would have definitely been a good year. Believe me, that Georgia team, you don't want to unleash that Georgia team back out in that playoff that year. I think they would have done it in Ohio State just like last year. So they would have been an extremely dangerous team to put right back into the playoffs. So the only thing I always wanted, I never wanted a committee. I would have been perfectly fine with the 14 playoff, but go back to the BCS point standings. That's the way it should have been done. But that's just me.
All right, well, we'll transition to a game that actually did happen on the field between Alabama and Florida State, and that was the season opener in 2017. The first ever college football game is that is affectionately known as Bryant-Denny Stadium East because of our success so many times there. It was number one Alabama versus number three Florida State. Jalen Hurts, his second year starting at quarterback. We were coming off the tough loss to Clemson in the national championship, where we almost completed going back to back that year. Had new offensive coordinator Brian Dable. Do you remember anything as far as your feelings or just your thoughts as far as getting into that game and that team as we kicked off the 2017 season?
So, I wasn't familiar with exactly what Brian Daboll would bring to the table as offensive coordinator. Obviously, Saban has certain structure that he's going to have to adhere to. So, again, a lot of questions, kind of like a lot of questions we're going to have for this year's Florida State game. With everyone knows Ryan Grubb's a great offensive coordinator, but Alabama fans haven't seen it up close and personal. We've only seen it from afar or read about it. Same thing I remember with Brian Daboll when he got hired to be the OC. The biggest thing I do remember though was a good defensive performance, and they knocked out DeAndre Francois in the second half, and basically ended the career of Jimbo Fisher. He left FSU to go to Texas A&M. So they basically ran him out of there after they took down the quarterback and wrecked that entire season for FSU.
Yeah, I hope we have more answers for our offense this year than coming off of that game in 2017 because it was not a very inspiring performance. But I think you have to give a lot of credit to Florida State being a very good team, being number three in the country. I know the first drive that we had, got into Florida State territory, had Andy Papanasis attempt a field goal that he missed, which may have been some foreshadowing for the end of the year as well. But was a really tight game throughout the first half, and almost would have gone into halftime, I think, down if Hurts had not hit Calvin Ridley for a 50 plus yard touchdown pass. Just really kind of struggled to move the ball. Hurts was still really struggling with his passing at that time. Had Bo Scarborough back, so still doing a lot of runs with Bo, obviously a lot of runs with Jalen. That game really changed when we blocked the punt midway through the third quarter, had the ball on the Florida State 4 yard line, couldn't punch it in, but did get a field goal out of that to go 13-7. On the ensuing kickoff, Florida State fumbled the kickoff. We recovered it on the 11. Next play, Damian Harris scores, got the 2 point conversion up 21-7. And then Florida State's very next offensive play, Francois throws an interception. And even though we didn't score on that drive, you kind of just got the sense it was typical Alabama sucking the wind out of the game basically and going to close it out, which we eventually did 24-7 over Florida State in that game. But it was when I was going back through just looking at the depth chart, not surprising with an Alabama team, the amount of depth that you had, but just thinking about some of the guys that were on the second team, you would say, the backup quarterback being Tua Tagovailoa, which credit to him getting through the Hawaiian language barrier to win the backup job at that point, just really impressive by him. Our third string running backs were Najee Harris and Josh Jacobs. Our backup tackles were Jedrick Wills and Alex Leatherwood. Dylan Moses was a backup linebacker. The rideouts was starting with Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs, and Devontae Smith. That was Devontae Smith's first ever Alabama game. It's just incredible the amount of depth that Alabama had at that point, and now you're seeing all those guys in the NFL on Sundays representing Alabama.
That freshman class, all the ones that you just highlighted, remember, they were all played pivotal moments in the national championship game. They came full circle. True freshmen against Florida State. They're in Atlanta, and they come right back, and they're pivotal and key to Alabama coming back to beat Georgia in the second half. So, uh, lots of talent. I don't know if you'll ever see that many teams that deep ever again, based on the way things are now with the transfer portal, revenue sharing, NIL, all that entire model. So going forward, it's a year by year situation. But here's the thing: I didn't joke about it, but college basketball fans are used to this. We've been living this life now for about 6, 7 years. So football fans are going to have to get accustomed to this roster turnover year over year and living one year at a time, one roster at a time, because that's the new reality for college football. It's the same as college basketball.
You're talking about, Florida State at the end of the year, Jimbo Fisher bolts to Texas A&M. That was also a year talking about controversial college football playoff spots. We get the 4 seed over Big Ten champion Ohio State, who had 2 losses. They lost at home to Oklahoma and lost by 21 points on the road to Iowa. Looking at Florida State's schedule, they actually had a game against Louisiana Monroe, who we'll get to talk about next week, being
Yep.
a week 2 opponent. The game got canceled because of Hurricane Irma and was not going to be played. And Florida State goes on and beats Florida at the end of the year. They're 5-6. They come back and reschedule that game against Louisiana Monroe for basically conference championship weekend to beat Louisiana Monroe, go to 6-6, and be bowl eligible. And I don't think it got to splitting hairs that much, but couldn't have hurt Alabama to have Florida State be 6-6 and not 5-6 when you're comparing resumes for that last spot in the college football playoff that year.
Yeah, I would agree on that one. I mean, Florida State, and it's a good name win, but it does help to at least have a 500 winning record. So, look, beating Florida State last year didn't mean much. They went 2-10, so it didn't carry much weight last year.
Well, one of the reasons that we wanted to start this podcast is we also wanted to hear from fans, some of your favorite games, favorite memories. And one of the requests that we got, which we were going to cover, was the 1974 Alabama Florida State game, which was another ugly game, but somehow
Very
we
ugly.
we pulled it out pulled it out in the end.
Yeah, so 1974, 8-7. And this was a very bad Florida State team. Make no mistake about it. That team only won one game in 1974, and that was against Miami. And they were winless the year before. So not one of Alabama's shining moments, but they did come back and win. I mean, they got down 7-0 early in the game, and they came back with two Bucky Berry field goals and a safety to win it. Now, not in that order. They got one field goal, and then Florida State found itself ahead like 7-3 deep on their own 5 yard line with like a minute and a half left and decided to intentionally take a safety. So it makes it 7-5. And then Alabama has a deep pass after the free kick to Ozzie Newsome. And then Barry comes out and kicks, I think it's a 36-yard field goal to basically win it. So I hope that's not the case this Saturday, that Alabama's going to have to depend on a field goal kicker. But that was a tenuous spot back in 1974. But again, that was one of those rare, you know, I guess a meteor in the sky where Alabama and Florida State actually played, considering how few times they have played, but not one of Alabama's most memorable victories, simply because of how bad Florida State was. But can you imagine the reverse would have happened if they had lost to basically then would have been like a 2-9 Florida State team that year if they would have gotten the victory? I
I think Florida State came into that game having lost 16 straight
think that's right.
games.
So,
And, think about the age that we live in now with social media and X and all that.
oh
The
goodness.
the 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 Monday morning quarterbacking of Florida State's football coach to take the intentional safety when you had not given up a touchdown. Alabama's on their third and fourth string quarterbacks. Gary Rutledge and Richard Todd were
That's
both,
right. They were both out.
and you decide to take the safety because you wanted an extra 15 yards. You didn't want to punt from the 5 yard line. You wanted to punt from the 20 yard line or have a free kick from the 20 yard line. And yeah, Ozzie Newsome, as a freshman, makes a huge play, 32 yards, gets us into the red zone. Of course, the next two plays went nothing, and that's when I think it was O'Rear was the third string quarterback. He's the one who completed the pass to Ozzie Newsome, but ended up getting hurt on one of the next two plays. And our fourth string quarterback comes in and tries to hit Newsome in the end zone, went incomplete, but hopefully luckily Barry came in, made the field goal, and we were able to escape with an 8-7 win. I don't
Well,
know. I don't know if you ever had one of the. I know you're probably familiar with the Crimson Classics VHS tapes
oh
that they
yeah.
made way back in the day. I remember it was came out in 2000. They made a Crimson Classics book that had a CD with the top 25 Alabama plays in Alabama history. So it's got Cornelius Bennett's the sack on there. It's got the Van Tiffin's kick. It's got the blocked field goal 1989 against Penn State. Kenny
Oh,
Stabler's run in the mud. Sean Alexander's run against Florida. Ozzie Newsome's catch against Florida State was one of the top 25 plays or made the top 25 list of that book. So I actually like remember a little bit of that call and have always remembered that game because it was in that Crimson Classics 25 best plays in Alabama history.
well, one thing for the older Florida State fans, that if you remember this game, remember they're going to be frustrated. They missed three field goals in that game, so their kicker couldn't make anything. So if they would have just made one field goal, they still would have found a way to win
And
that game in Bryant Denny
and short field
or
goals.
Denny Stadium. Sorry, not Bryant Denny, but
Yeah,
Denny Stadium. Yeah,
Denny
yeah.
Stadium.
Sorry, Denny Stadium. My bad.
Yeah, and they were very short field goals at that
Yeah.
time.
So that look, we're not the only school that has a history with frustrations over kicking. How about that?
Yeah, I hope we don't have any problems with kickers. Of course, we're breaking in a new kicker for this first game as well. And as you just shared with me, there might be some rain in the forecast. So hopefully it's not that close this Saturday down in Tallahassee. But maybe the kicking is on our side. Maybe, that 2017 game with Andy Papanasis missed going 2 for 4. We already got our misses out of the way. But we'll see. Going back to that 74 game, Florida State would go on to lose 19 straight games. And as you mentioned, they beat Miami that year to have at least one season. But then in 1976, they hired this guy from Birmingham, Alabama to lead the program that we're all very familiar with in Bobby Bowden.
Yep. So you know, there's always been a connection between Alabama and Bobby Bowden. maybe not the most direct connection, but always a connection in the fact that, of course, he's from Alabama. He did go to Alabama for 1 year before he decided to go back to Howard, now Sanford, to actually play there and later coach. And look, he has admitted at one time he thought about he would have loved to coach Alabama. And there was a time when he thought he was going to get that opportunity after Ray Perkins decided to leave to go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, everything just didn't work out the way that he thought it was going to. I know there was a search committee at the time after Perkins had announced that he was leaving. President Thomas, Gerald Thomas, led that. Bowden was under the impression that he was going to meet the board of trustees or the search committee and they were going to offer him the job, but it turned out to just be another interview. So he was a little disappointed with that. And he left the meeting with them just saying, "Hey, okay, we'll be in touch," basically. And then next thing you know, they offered the job to Bill Curry. So apparently, Bill Curry is a great interview when it comes to being, interviewed by a search committee. He did a great job, and I don't know why they didn't like Bobby Bowden, but again, we can go back and play revisionist history. What would Alabama football look like if they would have had Bobby Bowden starting, in 1987 going forward? Would he have replicated what he did at Florida State? You would like to think that he would. You never know. You can't just automatically say that he would, but I would say the evidence is there. It's probably a good chance. Because the one thing about Bobby Bowden, look, he gets picked on. Maybe he's not the most technical coach around, but he could recruit. He knew how to relate to players, and players like to play for him. He was definitely a player's coach. So I have no doubt that he would have recruited extremely well at Alabama. He would have had connections in Florida, which we knew was a pipeline back then for talent. So I do believe that he would have had a lot of success at Alabama. Now, would he have won 6 national championships? I don't know. Maybe he only wins one or two like he did at Florida State. But again, we'll never know. But that's how close it almost came. Because then when Curry left, then they went running to him, offering him the job, and he was already cemented his status at Florida State, and he turned him down not once but twice, I believe.
Well, I know when Saban retired, Coach Saban retired, there was a lot of people clamoring for one of Bobby Bowden's former players to be our coach. Maybe if he had been at Alabama and Deion Sanders had come to Alabama, that actually would have happened.
Well, that would have been very interesting. I can tell you that. I don't know how that would turn out, but that would have been very interesting. And then, yes, Deion Sanders playing in Alabama, had that been the case. What was really funny was Bowden for all those years at Florida State. Alabama and Florida State were always on these parallel paths and never crossed because the talk after the '92 season was, "Oh man, Alabama should have played Florida State instead of Miami that year." And if they would have had a 14, we would have. But that was another time when you had two programs both at their apex, and they just never crossed paths. Ironically, Auburn was the one that always ran into Florida State. Auburn played them during the regular season, or they'd run into them in a bowl game. But Alabama and Florida State, their paths just never crossed.
Do you think if Bobby Bowden takes the Alabama job in the 80s, that Terry Bowden, who eventually took the Auburn job going from Sanford, do you think he would have ever taken that Auburn job and competed against his dad, and we would have had our own version of the Bowden Bowl as part of the Iron Bowl, or do you think he would have stayed away and looked for something else?
No, if you know anything about Terry Bowden, he's got an ego, so I don't think he would have shied away 1 second. He would have, if Auburn would have offered him the job just like they did, after Pat died when he was at Sanford, he would have taken the job, and you would have had the Bowden Bowl happening in Alabama as opposed to when it was happening between Clemson and Florida State when Tommy was at Clemson. So without a doubt, Terry Bowden would have taken that job in a heartbeat.
And we still had some Iron Bowls in Legion Field at that time. So the Bowden Bowl, Iron Bowl in Birmingham, that might have been fun to watch back in the day.
Boy, you talk about a multiverse scenario there happening. I can only imagine playing playing like 92, 93. If Bobby Bowden's at Alabama and Terry Bowden's at Auburn and you're playing at Legion Field. Oh my gosh, that's pretty wild to think about. Definitely, that definitely would have been a very high level national interest game for sure, just because of the implications of the two schools and also because of the family ties.
And having some of those night games with Ron Franklin and Mike Gottfried on the call, that would have been vintage ESPN television back in the day.
That look, I'm nostalgic on a lot of things, and I really like the Ron Franklin, Mike Godfrey calls back in the '90s. I thought they were a great duo. I thought they did a really good job on ESPN.
Yeah, my hope is with this SEC partnership with ESPN that we got to see last year, that we will start seeing more Iron Bowls get that 6:30, 7 o'clock spot. Because when I was growing up in '96 and all those games until really CBS took over, that was when Alabama Auburn was played, when it was dark outside, 7 o'clock. I think the Iron Bowl deserves that primetime spot. Auburn's got to do their part and get there. But maybe that's something that we'll get to see in the future. So bringing it back to present day, again, you know, we won't get much into the analysis of Saturday. If you're looking for more football analysis, highly recommend the M3 podcast as part of Crimson Crossover. But what are your thoughts going into the game Saturday in year two under Coach DeBoer?
Uh, Well, I don't want to disappoint Alabama fans who are hoping for a national championship, but history is not on Alabama's side. You do have national championship winning coaches, but it usually happens in year three or year four, not in year two. Not saying you can't do it, because I know there's a lot of buzz and expectation, a lot of goodwill going on. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying right now, history is not on Alabama's side, but again, history is made to be broken. Alabama went to the Final Four. I waited my whole life to see it. It finally happened. So things can happen. History can change. And I do like the fact that we have a home and home series with Florida State, a traditional powerhouse that we just don't play very often. I would feel the same way if Alabama basketball ever played Kansas. I would like to see that happen one day. So we should cherish the matchup this year and next year. Never been, team's never been to Tallahassee. Hopefully the rain will hold off, but the forecast is not looking promising. So that may make it a little bit ugly. So we'll see.
Yeah, for those that know me, I'm very high on Ty Simpson. I'm very excited to see him under center. I'm very excited to see what we have with Ryan Grubb. I think very highly of Coach Womack. I think he did a great job with the defense last year. I know that might be some pushback from Alabama fans, um, but I'm very excited to see what we have. I feel like it's been very quiet in Tuscaloosa. Obviously, you live in Tuscaloosa, so maybe a little bit louder for you, but from an outsider's perspective, seems like they're very focused. They have a mission ahead of them. In some sense, it seems very businesslike to me, kind of back to early days of Coach Saban, and just very excited to see what we roll out with as far as our first game and what I imagine will be a hostile environment. And of course, Florida State's got a lot to play for coming off of a 2-10 season last year. So very excited to watch it. For those who don't know, and I imagine everybody does, but it'll be a 2:30 Central Time, 3:30 Eastern Time kickoff on ABC. We will be tuning into it, but we hope you tune into us next week as we get into Louisiana Monroe. That will be a fun one to talk about. So.
There's definitely things to talk about next week with Louisiana Monroe. That's for sure.
Well, we appreciate this. I would call this a successful first episode. Please like, subscribe, follow Crimson Crossover, follow the Tide Machine. We're looking forward to get more of these out throughout the season. So, Michael, appreciate it. Excited to do this with you, and we hope to be talking a little bit about a win, but talking a little bit more about Louisiana Monroe next week. So, everybody have a safe weekend and roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
The Paul W. Bryant Museum is a captivating destination for sports enthusiasts and fans of the University of Alabama football program. Located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the legendary coach Paul Bear Bryant. The Paul W. Bryant Museum showcases a remarkable collection of memorabilia, including trophies, photographs, and artifacts that span Bryant's career and the rich history of Alabama football. Visitors can explore interactive exhibits and learn about the team's storied past, making the Paul W. Bryant Museum a must-visit for any football aficionado. Fans can also experience exhibits highlighting success of both the Alabama men's basketball and women's softball programs. Open Tuesday through Sunday. Plan your visit today and experience the rich tradition of Alabama athletics. Roll Tide.